Bhagavatam class, so we follow the Bhagavatam format. How do we go about this? Am I audible?
Yes. We
So,
request everyone to please turn on their videos.
so I'll start with the prayers, and if I'm correct with the timings, is for Indian Standard Time is from 7:30 to 8:30. Correct?
7 o'clock here in the morning.
Fine. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. We'll recite together now. Narayanam namaskritya naram chaiva narottamam devim saraswatim vyasam tato jayamudire nashcha prayeshu bhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavati uttama shloke bhakti bhavati nashtaki Krishnaya Vasudevaya Devaki Nandanaya Nanda Gopa Kumaraya Govindaya Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna. So once again, thank you for this opportunity to speak on Srimad-Bhagavatam today morning for all of you and evening for me here in India. I guess the introduction was a little pompous. I don't think so. I have any of those qualifications. When I have to once in a while give a corporate program, so you have to present a corporate profile. That was not meant to be for something like a devotee community. But our Rishabh Prabhu have selected a topic for me, title as Confused Whom to Worship. And since then, I'm confused what to speak. So I have chosen a verse from the second canto, from third chapter, on which I had given a class maybe last year on this topic. I believe from where Rishabh Prabhu picked up this topic. So I'll share a screen for, okay, the host would have to allow me to share the screen. We're gonna share the Veda base and read from second canto, third chapter, verse number 10. All right, great, is there. 2.3.10. Akama sarva kamo va moksha kama udaradi
Moksha kama udaradi
tivrena bhakti yogena
Devrena bhakti yogena
yajita purusham param.
Yajita purusham param.
So word by word to this is a very famous verse of Srimad-Bhagavatam. Akamaha, one who has transcended all material desires. Sarvakama, one who has a sum total of material desires. Va, either. Mokshakama, one who desires liberation. Udharadhi, with broader intelligence. Tivrena, with great force. Bhakti Yogena, by devotional service to the Lord. Yajeta, should worship. Purusham, the Lord. Param, the supreme whole. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki. A person who has broader intelligence, Udaradhi, whether he be full of all material desires Sarvakama, without any material desires, that is Akama, or desiring liberation, moksha, must by all means worship the Supreme Whole, the personality of Godhead. The puppet. Okay, we'll go through the puppet. It's a little long. It's fine, I'll read out. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, is described in the Bhagavad Gita as Purushottama, or the Supreme Personality. It is He only who can award liberation to the impersonalists by absorbing such aspirants in the Brahma Jyoti, the bodily rays of the Lord. The Brahma Jyoti is not separate from the Lord, as the glowing sun rays are not independent of the sun disk. Therefore, one who desires to merge into the Supreme Impersonal Brahma Jyoti must also worship the Lord by Bhakti Yoga, as recommended here in the Srimad-Bhagavatam. Bhakti Yoga is especially stressed here as a means of all perfection. In the previous chapters, it has been stated that Bhakti Yoga is the ultimate goal of both Karma and Jnana Yoga. In the same way, in this chapter, it is emphatically declared that Bhakti Yoga is the ultimate goal of the different varieties of worship of the different demigods. Bhakti Yoga, this being the supreme means of self-realization, is recommended here. Everyone must therefore seriously take up the methods of Bhakti Yoga, even though one aspires for material enjoyment or liberation from material bondage. Now, Srila Prabhupada will talk about what is Akama and then Udaradi. So let's take a look at it. An Akama is one who has no material desire, a living being naturally being the part and parcel of the Supreme Whole, Purusham Purnam, Mame Vamsu Jiva Loka Jiva Bhuta Sanatan. That's what Srila Prabhupada is quoting, has his natural function to serve the Supreme Lord. Just as the part and parcel of the body or the limbs of the body are naturally meant to serve the Supreme Body, complete body. Desirelessness means not to be inert like the stone, but to be conscious of one's actual position and thus desire satisfaction only from the Supreme Lord. The Mayavadis or impersonalists, they want to become desireless. So Srila Prabhupada therefore is qualifying what Akama means. That's just not possible. Desirelessness, Prabhupada said, not to become inert like a stone, but not to have any desire except for pleasing the Lord. Srila Prabhupada writes further. Srila Jiva Goswami has explained this desirelessness as Bhajaniya Parama Purush Sukhamatra Sa Sukhatvam in his Sundar. This means that one should feel happy only by experiencing the happiness of the Supreme Lord. This intuition of the living being is sometimes manifested even during the conditioned stage of a living being in the material world. And such intuition is expressed in the manner of altruism, philanthropy, socialism, communism, etc., by the undeveloped minds of less intelligent persons. In the mundane field, such an outlook of doing good to others in the form of a society, community, family, country, and humanity is a partial manifestation of the same original feeling in which a pure living entity feels happiness by the happiness of the Supreme Lord. Such superb feelings were exhibited by the gopis. The gopis loved the Lord without any return, and this is the perfect exhibition of the Akama spirit. The Kama spirit of the desire for one's own gratification is fully exhibited in the material world, whereas the spirit of Kama is fully exhibited in the spiritual world. The thoughts, Hare Krishna. The thoughts of becoming one with the Lord, now the subject matter of moksha, or being merged in the Brahma Jyoti can also be exhibitions of the Kama spirit, if they are desire for one's own satisfaction, to be free from the material miseries. In other words, moksha means freedom from material sufferings, and that is also a Kama. A pure devotee does not want liberation so that he may be relieved from the miseries of life. Even without so-called liberation, a pure devotee aspires for the satisfaction of the Lord, influenced by the Kama spirit. Arjuna declined to fight in Kurukshetra battlefield because he wanted to save his relatives for his own satisfaction. But being a pure devotee, he agreed to fight on the instruction of the Lord because he came to his senses and realized that satisfaction of the Lord at the cost of his own satisfaction was his prime duty. Thus, he became Akama. That is the perfect stage of perfect living being. And Srila Prabhupada now concludes the purport describing the meaning of Udaradhi, broad-minded. People with desires for material enjoyment worship small demigods. And such intelligence is condemned in Bhagavad Gita 7:20 as Hit Jnana, whose intelligence has been lost to senses. One cannot obtain any result from demigods without getting sanction from the Supreme Personality. Therefore, a person with a broader outlook can see that the ultimate authority is the Lord, even for material benefits. Under the circumstances, one with broader outlook, even with the desire for material enjoyment or for liberation, should take to the worship of the Lord directly. And everyone, whether an Akama, Sakama, Mokshakama, should worship Lord with great expedience. This implies that Bhakti Yoga may be perfectly administered without any mixture of karma and jnana, as the unmixed sun rays are very forceful and are therefore called tivra. Similarly, unmixed Bhakti Yoga of hearing, chanting, etc. may be performed by one and all regardless of inner motive. Om Jnana Masya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Juta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavansha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Tam Sajivam Sadhaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Shri Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitanscha Namao Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Nitinamine Namaste Saraswate Devi Gauravani Pracharini Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashyata Deshatarine Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Padayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namane Gotase Namaha Vanchakalpatarubhyasya Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gourangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gau Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna. So reading out the translation once again of the verse that we just read for today. We are reading from Srimad-Bhagavatam, second canto, chapter number 3, verse number 10. A person who has a broader intelligence, whether he be full of all material desires, without any material desire or desiring liberation, must by all means worship the Supreme Whole, the personality of Godhead. Hare Krishna. So the topic which is shortlisted for today's discussion is whom to worship. We are reading from the second canto, third chapter, wherein right now the flow of the discussion is such that at the end of the first canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam, Parishit Maharaj asked Sukhdev Maharaj, Sukhdev Goswami, what is the duty of a dying man? What should be chanted? What should be remembered by a person who is about to die? Like that, the first canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam concludes, and now the second canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam begins, wherein there is a discussion by Sukhdev Goswami on what should be remembered, what should be chanted. However, Sukhdev Goswami, although he is speaking to Parishit Maharaj, but he is not the only one who is listening to Sukhdev Goswami. There are many sages have assembled from all over the world and the universe, but not all of them are on the same level of their yoga practice or of their consciousness. Therefore, Sukhdev Goswami begins the second canto. When he begins to answer, he begins to first speak about Ashtanga Yoga. I'm not going to go into details of all what has been discussed, but he highlights different practices, and then finally he comes to the third chapter, where now he speaks about what he has established up to now is about the intelligent class of people and less intelligent class of people. Intelligent class of people, they take to Ashtanga Yoga or they take to Bhakti Yoga. And while discussing about Ashtanga Yoga and Bhakti Yoga, in the second chapter, the chapter prior to this, Sukhdev Goswami draws his conclusion. He says that Bhakti Yoga is the easiest and the best process. We'll discuss about it in a short while how. And then now from third chapter, he begins to speak about less intelligent class of people who take to demigod worship. And that is a flow of discussion where from the second verse up to the ninth verse, we'll also take a look at that discussion, where Sukhdev Goswami talked about, it has been observed that many people worship many different devatas for the fulfillment of different desires. It is not an instruction which has been described by Sukhdev Goswami in the previous verse, which we'll take a look at in a short while. But it's an observation which has been given that somebody wants, wealth, they would worship Kuber, etc., etc. Beautiful woman, a beautiful wife, beautiful husband, they will worship Uma, Lord Shiva, etc., etc. Those things are mentioned. And then finally, this particular verse comes where discussion is on whoever you are, whatever is the situation, you are desireless. Srila Prabhupada explained in the purport what desirelessness means. Means no desire for one's own sense gratification. Or you have all the desires to be fulfilled, akama, sarva kama, va, moksha kama, or else you have desire for mukti or liberation. Whatever is your situation, in any situation, one should come and worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead, known as Lord Shri Krishna. So today, speaking on the subject matter of whom to worship, all of us, we are studying Srimad-Bhagavatam, would definitely would have gone through Bhagavad Gita, would at least would have some understanding of Bhagavad Gita. The subject matter of whom to worship is discussed elaborately in Bhagavad Gita. Before we get into the subject matter from Bhagavad Gita, let's start with a very fundamental thing. What is the need to ask this question, whom to worship? Is there even a need to ask? If you look at other prominent religions, such a question does not arise in itself, isn't it? I'm particularly indicating for any Abrahamic tradition for that reason. Such a question does not arise of whom to worship. You have certain faith to what you believe in, and there is a particular deity. They don't call it a deity, they have a particular Lord they worship. When it comes to Vedic culture, this question is often discussed. And particularly in today's day and time, it's definitely discussed a lot. There's a lot of confusion. In one of the spiritual organizations here in India, one of our devotee before becoming Krishna conscious or taking to the path of bhakti was visiting that particular institution or spiritual organization. They had a temple and there was series of altars with different devatas. At the end of it all, there was one altar. And it was written, for every altar, the name of the god was written. And at that altar, it was written, or there was a signboard, the god of Kali Yuga. Any guesses who could probably be sitting on the altar? The altar said God of Kali Yuga. Make a wild guess. Let's just interact. It said on that altar, it said God of Kali Yuga. Okay, Amit Hari Prabhu is saying Kalki. Fantastic. What else? It said God of Kali Yuga.
Chaitanya Mahaprabhu.
Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Okay, Atma Ram Prabhu says Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Prabhu, that was not an ISKCON of Gaudiya Math, for your information. It was a different organization. So, okay. Enough of guesses. Let me give you an answer. There was a mirror. Whoever went there saw their reflection in the mirror. That was a god of Kali Yuga. As many people went there, as many gods were created in Kali Yuga. So the subject matter of whom to worship is an important and interesting subject matter which ought to be analyzed. So before we come to the subject matter of Srimad-Bhagavatam, with your kind permission, I'll little bit reflect from Bhagavad Gita. And then we'll take a look at it, what Srimad-Bhagavatam in this series of verses elaborates or speaks on the subject matter of whom to worship. This discussion on whom to worship begins for the first time in the 4th chapter by Lord Shri Krishna. Vedic culture is generally considered pluralist. Pluralist means having many gods. However, Bhagavad Gita very clearly establishes the monotheistic stance. What is monotheistic stance? One God, not many gods. There is a one supreme God. In 4th chapter, verse number 11, 12, 13, 3 verses addresses 3 major misconceptions. We're not going to go into all the 3 misconceptions. The very first misconception, which is addressed, just to a little bit introduce what is the flow of discussion, is people say different path. Any path you take, it will bring you to the same conclusion. Whereas Krishna says, Ye yathamam prapadante tam sathaiva bhajamyam. As you surrender unto me, I shall reward. When a karmi surrenders to the Lord, Krishna fulfills their material desire. When a jnani surrenders, he wants to, merge into Brahman. So Krishna gave him Brahman realization. Whereas a yogi surrenders, he wants to acquire mystic opulences. Krishna gives mystic opulence. When a devotee surrenders, he wants to serve the Lord. Krishna awards service. So if you see, there are 4 different categories of people that I just highlighted: karmi, jnani, yogi, and a bhakta, having 4 different paths, but the results is not same, isn't it? Ye yathamam prapadante tam sathaiva bhajamyam. That's the first thing. Second misconception, which is clarified in the 12th verse of the 4th chapter, is that all demigods are same as the Supreme Lord, which means all of them are on the same level. Lord Shri Krishna debunks this idea in the 4th chapter, 12th verse, saying that no, they are Jiva Tattva. They are my part and parcels. They are not on the same level as me. So why do people approach the Devatas? Krishna says they approach for their fruitive desires. Now, why do they approach Devatas for fruitive desires? Because the Devatas fulfill it very quickly. Now, why do they fulfill quickly? Lord Shri Krishna explains in the 3rd chapter of Bhagavad Gita himself. This is discussion from 11th verse onward, where Krishna says, in this world, to live in harmony, I have created a system of interdependency between the Devatas and the living entities of this world. Particularly Bharatvarsh, which is known in the whole universe as Karma Bhumi, not anywhere else. So the yajna, the penances, the austerities being performed by a living entity here on the name of a particular devata, by that the particular devata gets nourished. The result of those sacrifices becomes the ahar or nourishment for the devata. Being pleased by those offerings, the devata reciprocates. And a classic example is from Krishna Lila, where Krishna's parents, Vasudev, not Vasudev, Nanda Maharaj, wanted to perform Govardhan. Not Govardhan, I'm sorry. Wanted to perform Indra Puja, right? He wanted to perform Indra Puja, thinking that Indra would be pleased and will have plenty of rainfall. So this is a Vedic instruction. Vedic scriptures talk about it, no doubt about it. As I said, third chapter of Bhagavatam says of interdependency. However, Lord Shri Krishna builds up the subject matter in the fourth chapter where he says, no, if you want to worship Devatas with a proper understanding. They are not at the same level as me. Devatas are Jiva Tattvas. They are empowered beings, just like a prime minister or the chief minister of country has a far much more resources, has far much more ability by himself as compared to a common citizen. But at the end of the day, he's also a living entity or a human being. So it's like a Devata. So this particular concept is established here. Then move forward to the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Then Lord Shri Krishna from 20th to the 23rd verse again speaks on the subject matter of demigod worship. There in that subject also Lord Shri Krishna, when he begins to talk about Devatas, Krishna first of all says, why do people approach Devatas? Because in 7th chapter, Lord Shri Krishna has already, not in 7th, prior also Lord Shri Krishna already established himself to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So Arjuna had this doubt and he asked, my dear Lord, you have spoken about the four kinds of people who surrender unto you, who do not surrender unto you. But what about those who take shelter of Devatas? What about them? And then Lord Krishna began to speak. The very important verses 7, 20, 21, 22, like that. Where Krishna said in 20th verse, Kamestasya hitagnyanaha prapadante anya devataha tam niyamamasthaya prakritya niyataha saya. Which means, Kamestasya hitagnyana. Those whose intelligence had been stolen by material desire, they surrender unto demigods. And they follow the particular rules and regulation of worship according to their own natures. So if you just analyze the subject matter of demigod worship, yes, people approach them because they have material desire. They reciprocate more quickly. But there is a drawback with that reciprocation. Srila Prabhupada in one of the purport talks about an example of Ravana. And Srimad-Bhagavatam in the second canto only is mentioned. Prabhupada said Ravana was such a great personality and he was a worshipper of Lord Shiva. Worshipping Lord Shiva had acquired great powers, because of which every other living entity, including the Devatas, were afraid of Ravana. But what was the end result? Could Ravana become eternal? Could Ravana become reformed of his behavior? No. In fact, the same Ravana, by worshipping Lord Shiva, became so proud, so arrogant, and so foolish because of his pride that he ended up kidnapping none other than the consort or the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So therefore, Lord Shri Krishna in this 20th verse says, Kamestasya hitagnyana, whose intelligence have been stolen by material desires. Only such people approach demigods. And not only that, in the next verse, Krishna says, Yo yam tanum bhakta shraddhyarchitam ichchati, which means Krishna says, as I sitting in the heart of every living entity as super soul, it is I who makes a faith of a living entity steady on that particular Devata or demigod. In other words, here Lord Shri Krishna further emphasizes or clarifies the dependency of Devatas on Krishna. The Devatas are not independent of the Lord. And in the next verse, Krishna says, whatever benedictions Devatas award you, actually they are awarding because of my own mercy. In other words, the worship of Devatas is an indirect worship of me, but you don't know whom you are worshipping. So in essence, through the pages of Bhagavad Gita, this discussion continues. 9th chapter also have this discussion. At least fortunately, some people worship Devatas. Worse than that are those who do not worship anyone. They say the God does not exist. Or another category of people are those who consider I am God, the Mayavadis. So all these categories have been discussed and highlighted through the verses of discussion between Krishna and Arjuna. And time and again, conclusion is one. There's a source of all, and the source of all is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, according to Srimad-Bhagavatam, exists in three features. Vadantitas, Tattvavidas, Tattvam Yajnanam Advayam, Brahmeti, Paramatmeti, Bhagavaneti, Shabdyate. Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan realization. Apart from this discussion on different devatas, different forms of worship and all that, Bhagavad Gita also emphasizes on yoga. All of you are aware of, Bhagavad Gita is a book of yoga. Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Ashtanga Yoga, Bhakti Yoga. One thing is common in all of them. Can anyone make a guess? What is the one commonality between all these different yogas? If I ask you, what is one commonality between all these yogas? What would be your answer? Okay, Swatiji says yoga, fantastic. Anything else? That was definitely commonality. Karma yoga, Jnana yoga. So yes, yoga is that commonality. Connection to God, great. Mother Swati, you're saying connection to God. Please be more concise and precise. You're on the right direction. Material benefit. Ultimate goal is God. So that's a question. Who is God? You know, you can't be abstract when you say God. What would you say? What is the commonality between all these yogas? The commonality between all of these yogas is ultimately it all brings you to Krishna. The word yoga means to link with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So some of you said God. You're not wrong, but it is not also clear whom you're referring to. God could be Hanumanji. God could be Narad Muni. You know? So yoga, whenever you talk about yoga, there is no yoga that you perform and you attain Bhakti of Ganeshji. There is no Ganesh yoga or Devi yoga. All yogas bring you to the worship of Supreme Personality of Godhead. So that's another aspect of Bhagavad Gita that highlights through the subject matter of yoga. So 9th chapter also discusses on the same line, and the discussion goes on. And the conclusion of all that is the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the object of worship. Now, why he's object of worship will come about it in a short while. So this is a conclusion of Srimad-Bhagavatam. Let's come to the subject matter of this particular series of verses, particularly the 2nd canto, 3rd chapter, from which the 10th verse we have taken. Before we address this particular verse here, what is going on and what is being described before, is demigod worship recommended in scriptures? Yes, demigod worship is recommended in scripture. 3rd chapter of Bhagavad Gita already highlights it. Why? Because people situated in different modes of consciousness would be attracted to different personalities. That's why different prescriptions of worship of different devatas is given. Vedic scriptures or Vedic culture does not isolate anyone. In fact, it encompasses everyone in such a way, in whatever status of consciousness you are, you have somebody to accept as a higher authority. Somebody is in a mode of ignorance, they are naturally, generally are attracted towards worship of Kali. Somebody is in mode of passion, you can call Lord Shiva, Brahma, etc., etc. And those who are in mode of goodness, they're generally attracted to worship Lord Vishnu. So all of us are affected, influenced, and controlled by the modes of consciousness. Therefore, there are different demigod worship or different worships are recommended. Now, coming back to the Srimad-Bhagavatam, what we were trying to discuss from here, that was a perspective of Bhagavad Gita. Let's take a look what Srimad-Bhagavatam speaks about it. So in this same chapter, let me maybe go back to Veda base. All of you can take a look what Veda base talks about. Let me share the screen. So prior to this verse, from verse number 2nd to verse number 10, it is mentioned about approaching and worshipping different devatas. So I'll not read out all of those, but here it is from second to seventh verse. Just briefly we'll highlight. I mean, it's a big translation. We'll take a look at it. So, as I said, here Sukdev Goswami, now while speaking to Parishit Maharaj, speaks about that it is generally observed people who are having material desires, they approach different devatas. And according to that observation, some hints and clues are given here. One who desires to merge into impersonal Brahma Jyoti should worship the master of Vedas, Brahma. Who desires powerful sex should worship Indra. Who desires a progeny, worship the king of progenitors, Prajapati. Who desires good fortune should worship Durga Devi. Who desires to be powerful should worship fire. Like this, I'm not going to read the whole thing. The list goes on and so forth. And similarly, in the 8th verse, it is mentioned, and similarly in the 9th verse. So one who desires domination over a kingdom should worship the Manus. One who desires victory over an enemy should worship the demons. Like that, for different desires, different personalities are being mentioned whom we should worship. And then finally, the 10th verse comes, where now Sukdev Goswami says, Akama sarva kamova moksha kama daridi. Tivirena bhakti yogena yajate purusha param. After describing that you can approach, or it is observed that people approach different devatas for fulfillment, different desires, now Sukdev Goswami says, well, why do you want to waste your time? If you have desire, any desire, please approach Lord Vishnu only. Now, why Sukdev Goswami would recommend approaching Lord Vishnu for even for material desires? Or let's put it this way, let me ask a question this way. What is the harm if I can approach Lord Vishnu for material desire, then what is the harm if I approach Ganeshi for removing impediments from my life? If I approach Saraswati to give me knowledge, if I approach some other Devata who give me some other material benefit, why should I approach Vishnu? One classic example is of Dhruva Maharaj. We all know the story. I'm not going to go into details of it, assuming it. Suruchi and Suniti, Dhruva, a 5-year-old boy, gets deeply hurt, insulted by his stepmother Suruchi. And when he goes back to his mother Suniti, she advises him. He asked his mother, what should I do? I want to take a revenge. I'm greatly insulted. I want to respond back to my stepmother. So Suniti said, well, it is beyond me. Only the Supreme Personality of Godhead can help you. And then she directs him to Madhuvan. She doesn't direct him to Madhuvan, she tells him go to the forest. Wherein Nadmani comes, meets with Dhruva Maharaj and directs him to Madhuvan. And there he goes and performs austerities for 6 months, worshipping Lord Vishnu. At the end of it, Lord Vishnu appears. So here, Dhruva Maharaj had approached the Supreme Personality of Godhead with a material desire. And what was the desire? He wanted a kingdom greater than his great-grandfather, Brahmaji. And here he has a darshan of Lord Vishnu. Tears are flowing from the eyes of this 5-year-old boy. Lord takes his conch, puts on his head, and he begins to glorify, begins to speak of incredible poetry describing the beauty and the glories of the Supreme Personality Godhead. And finally, Vishnu said, so I'm here, ask for a blessing. And then Dhruva Maharaj said, my dear Lord, and for this reason, Sukdev Goswami is saying, don't go to anyone else. If you have to worship, even if you have desires, worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And what is the reason? When Dhruva Maharaj had a darshan of the Lord, he said, my dear Lord, I came to ask you for a broken pieces of glasses, and I have got the rare diamonds in the form of your darshan. Yet, his desire was fulfilled. He did got a kingdom greater than the kingdom of Brahma. He got a Dhruva Lok, which is said to be a Vaikuntha Lok within the material world, where the Supreme Personality of Godhead resides eternally, forever in the words. But what had happened during the course of approaching the Supreme Personality of Godhead? That is the most important thing. That his heart got purified of all material desires. When he had the darshan of the Lord, he did not wanted that desire to be fulfilled anymore. Now, what is the wrong? What's the problem if I would have had continued with that material desire? Why? What is the advantage of getting one's heart purified, wherein Dhruva Maharaj did not wanted anything for himself? And the reason is, which Srila Prabhupada highlights time and again in his purports. When you approach demigods, let's take a look at this way. We all are in this material world. The real problems of life are not the food, not the lack of wealth, and not the lack of material comfort. The real problems of life is birth, death, old age, and disease. According to Bhagavad Gita, one who worships a particular deity or devata at the end of life goes to the planet of that particular devata. Unfortunately, at the end of Brahma's life, when this whole universe is destroyed, when the end of, when the time of winding up pastime of this Prakriti, then even the planets of devatas are destroyed. Everything is again destroyed. The living entity who went to the abode of that particular devata has to die again. So birth, death, old age, disease continues. He does not get freed from the real problems of life. So when somebody goes and approaches devatas, his desire is certainly fulfilled. No doubt about it. Just an example of Ravana we discussed, or Hiranyakashipu for that reason, or anyone. There's so many examples. For example, Jayadratha, when he was insulted by the Pandavas for trying to abduct. In fact, he abducted and kidnapped Mother Draupadi. When Jayadratha was insulted, he went to the forest and he worshipped Lord Shiva. And his heart was full with revenge. And he asked Lord Shiva, my dear Shiva, Shiva was pleased. And he said, okay, Jayadratha, what do you want? And he said, my dear Lord, I want to take revenge from the Pandavas. Lord Shiva said, oh, sorry, you approached the wrong person. I cannot help you to take a revenge with Pandavas. That is beyond me. What do you want? So by the meaning of revenge, Jayadratha wanted to kill Pandavas. Lord Shiva said, well, that's not possible. That's beyond my capacity because they're protected by Lord Krishna. So ask for something else. The Jayadratha thought, okay, if you cannot, if I cannot kill them or defeat them, then at least allow me to, hold them in a war. They should not be able to cross beyond me. So Lord Shiva said, well, I can give you a boon that Yudhishthira, Bhima, Nakul, Sahadev, you can stop them, but Arjuna is unstoppable. That's beyond you. Krishna and Arjuna, Narayan Rishi, that's just not possible. So Jayadratha got that boon. Nothing changed for him. His sinful desires, his sinful inclination continued. And what was the result of it? At the end of the day, Arjuna killed Jayadratha. He had to die, and a very miserable death. Not only he had to die, his father also got killed because of him, or vice versa, like that. So yes, when person approaches demigods, their desires are fulfilled, but nothing changes in the heart. We get temporary benefits, just like the material advancement which the modern scientists are able to give us, better facilities. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur calls this better facilities as something which makes us more foolish, more forgetfulness of the real problems of life. So yes, the demigods or the modern scientists, they give us the facility, but they do not solve the real problems of life. And scriptures, Bhagavad Gita, Srimad-Bhagavatam teaches us that only the worship of Lord Vishnu or Lord Shri Krishna can deliver us from the real problems of life. The greatest problem of life is avidya. That avidya leads to desires, and that desire leads to papa, sinful action, and that sinful action leads to suffering. This is from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, chapter 1, where Srila Rupa Goswami talks about the 6 characteristics of bhakti, and he defines as Kleshagni, Sudha Moksha Lagat, Prasudulava, Sandrananda, Visheshatma, Shri Krishna, Akarshani Chasa. Kleshagni, the moment one takes to bhakti of the Lord, that never happens in the demigod worship. When somebody takes to the bhakti of the Lord, then he begins to experience transcendental bliss. Many times people ask this question, I have seen my mother and my mother-in-law, my family members doing worship. They do so much puja part, but they have never shown any transformation in their character. Have you ever come across a situation? Have you ever wondered? So many times people ask me, what is the use of worshipping if the person still remains the same? If you still find faults with others, he still complains, what is the use of it? And therefore, we have to understand that is beyond the capacity of demigod worship. It just would not happen because that is not what they reciprocate to. It's just like a shopkeeper business. When a person goes to a shopkeeper, he pays money, the shopkeeper returns it with whatever money worth product he has asked for. But when it goes to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, yes, Krishna will fulfill our material desire. But before he fulfills our material desires, he rectifies our sinful propensity behind it. So therefore, Srila Rupa Goswami, when it comes to describing the characteristics of bhakti, he says Kleshagni, the very first thing. Second is Subhada. When one takes to the path of bhakti, his life becomes all auspicious. And what are the features of all auspiciousness? Such a person by nature becomes compassionate. He loves every living entity as one's part and parcel. Think about of any example of any demigod worshipper. Let's put it the other way around. Think about of any example of Lord Vishnu's devotee who saw other living entities as his enemy. Any example? I'm talking the devotee, not Kamsa. I'm sorry, I have some devotee sitting here. Somebody gave me an answer. Now think about many demigod worshippers that we know of. The Ravana, many examples. They are generally very envious of other living entities. Yes or no? So therefore, Srila Rupa Goswami mentions that when one takes to bhakti, what happens? First of all, auspiciousness. And what is the definition of auspiciousness? The definition of auspiciousness, as Rupa Goswami describes in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, is Shubhani Priyaninam Sarvat Jagatam Anuraktata Sadguna Sukhamiti Adini Akhtini Manishivi, which means the very first quality is Sarva Jagatam Priyaninam. Such a person becomes, he develops an affinity and compassion for all living entities. Vidya Vinaya Sampani Bhamini Gavi Hastani Sunicheva Sapakicha Pandita Samadarshina. He sees every living entity as his brother and sister. Mamevamsu Jiva Loke Jiva Bhuta Sanatana, because everything is a part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And an example is of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu walking through Jarikhanda forest. The lions and the deers were embracing each other, they were kissing each other. Although for the deer, the greatest enemy is a lion. In South India, in Adi Keshav temple, there's a very beautiful picture from a pastime of Krishna Leela, when it is shown when Lord Shri Krishna is playing his flute, lion and the cow is embracing each other, and the lion's cub is drinking milk from the cow, and the cow's calf is drinking milk from the lion. The most, the rivals, they become dear to each other. They become kind to each other. That's what worship of the Supreme Personality brings about the change in one. Second thing which is mentioned is Sadagunaha. When a person takes to bhakti of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then he develops all good qualities. Yasyasi bhaktir bhagavati yakinchana sarve gune satra samasita suraha harava bhaktasya krato mahatguna manoratena siddhavato bhahi. When a living entity, or when, let's say, a human being, or when a person takes to the bhakti, then he develops all the good qualities. And Srila Prabhupada gives an example of his disciples. He writes this in Nectar of Devotion, and he says, look at our young boys and girls. They're also coming from the same society where everyone else is wasting their precious human form of life in intoxication and all illicit activities. They're also young. They have a strong mind and senses, yet they have given up on all irreligious activities. So much so, they do not even go to theaters to watch movies. They do not smoke. There's no question of intoxication. They do not even drink coffee and tea. And what has brought about such a change in them? Srila Prabhupada says, that's the power of bhakti. Sadguna, it develops naturally. And these are the practical proofs. And then another feature of bhakti is Sukham, as Srila Rupa Goswami describes under the definition of Shubhada. Sukham, a transcendental bliss, exists at three levels. Happiness because of material gratification, happiness because of freedom from all suffering, which means moksha, and happiness from service to Supreme Personality of Godhead. And a simple example is given: negative axis, positive axis, and zero axis. Whatever happiness we derive in this world from our sensual activities, it is always in the negative axis. And the answer is simple. Our experience of happiness in this world is directly proportional to our suffering. Yes or no? Think about it. Let me just ask a very simple question to all of you. If I give you a glass of water, your experience of drinking that glass of water would depend on your thirst. Yes or no? If I give you a glass of water, your experience of relishing the glass of water would depend on your thirst level. Give me a raise of hands so I understand it's making sense to all of you. If you are thirsty, your response will be maja aa gaya. You know, like wow, that's fantastic. And if you're not thirsty, just as a matter of respect, for example, if I give you or somebody gives you, you might just take a sip and keep it aside. Yes or no? So the point is being made here, the suffering, or let's put it this way, the happiness through sense perception is directly proportional to suffering. Thirst is a suffering. Hunger is a suffering. Is it making sense? And the nature of this happiness is it never subsides. It is not that you have drank a whole glass of water, you will not feel thirsty ever again. After some time, you're thirsty again. So your material happiness always remains in negative axis. There is no joy actually. And then there is a platform of freedom from suffering that is called as zero axis, moksha, but there is actually no happiness. So as Srila Rupa Goswami describes, the happiness actually comes from the platform of bhakti to the Lord. Why? That's a platform where we have exchanges, real life exchanges with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, as Vasalya, Madhurya, Sakhe, Dase, etc. rasas, in which we exchange. There is a joy when we hear the glories of the Supreme Personality of the Godhead. There is a joy when we serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead. There is a joy in association of devotees, which is all missing otherwise in only moksha platform. What to speak about demigod worship, wherein you remain in the material world. So like this, Srila Rupa Goswami gives various reasons of how bhakti is superior, how bhakti awards certain benedictions. To conclude with, as I was making a point, yes, you can approach devatas, you can declare yourself as God, there are different options given, but all of them will keep us in this material world. None of us will set us free from the real problems of life. And the main cause of all of that is our desires, material desires, which are born of avidya. It can only be, for example, papa, sinful act. For that, we get sinful reaction. There's a lot of different kinds of prayashita, repentance is described or prescribed. But with all those prescriptions, we cannot get fixed or freed of our sinful desires. This is a discussion from the 6th canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam. It is only possible to purify our sinful desire only through the process of bhakti. This is what is described in Srimad-Bhagavatam 6th canto, where he said, Taistani ghani puyante tapudana vratadivi na dharmajam tadodhrityam tad apeshangri sevaya. 6th canto, 2nd chapter, verse number 17, which explains that you may neutralize your sinful reactions by austerity, dana, charity, which means, and different methods, but they cannot uproot the material desires in one's heart. However, if one serves the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he is freed from all such contaminations. So, in conclusion, when one takes to bhakti or worship of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, his life becomes all auspicious. He develops equal vision. He develops love for all living entity. In other words, Nirmas Sarana, his heart becomes purified of envy towards other living entities. He develops all the good qualities. He develops the transcendental bliss of which is being described by Srila Rupa Goswami. The drop of the transcendental bliss is far greater than the oceans of material happiness or moksha. Whereas when we worship devatas, they can only give us, award us certain amount of material happiness, which is temporary and which does not set us free from the real problems of life. Yes, demigod worship is prescribed in the scriptures, which is according to the different modes of consciousness. But those who are situated in mode of goodness, or those who have the advantage of associating with Vaishnavas, they should and they would naturally take to the worship of Lord Vishnu, take to bhakti, and make their life successful. To conclude with, therefore, Sukdev Goswami called Shri Parikshit Maharaj as a very intelligent person. Why? Because he had only 7 days to live. He did not decide to make some arrangements for his enjoyment. He didn't want to fulfill his some pending desires before he gave up his body, which generally people like to do when they're on the final stages. Let me fulfill all my desires before I die. Rather, as soon as he got to know, he immediately left everything, went and took shelter of the Ganges or Yamuna. Both the versions are described. And where he found Sukdev Goswami, took shelter of him, and he said, "What? I would like to hear from you about the glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead." And therefore, Sukdev Goswami said, only by taking the shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one can actually become fearless. Why? Because one who is fearless can award us fearlessness. One who is fearful, how can he award us fearlessness? One who is beyond the modes of material nature, one who's always liberated, one who never gets contaminated by the modes of consciousness or modes of material nature, can award us that freedom from the clutches of the modes of material nature, not those who are themselves controlled or are dominated by the modes. One who is the source of all, the cause of all, can help us get delivered from our situation, not those who themselves are the effect of someone else's cause. So therefore, like this, our scriptures recommend the worship of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, which is all blissful, all joyful process. Even at the stage of sadhana bhakti, one can experience the joy of Krishna consciousness. To conclude with, the Hare Krishna devotees, or Krishna, our Hare Krishna devotees is a more appropriate word. The Hare Krishna devotees are the greatest sense enjoyers. I mean, let me give you a purport before I conclude what it means. I meant to say the greatest sense enjoy means they have the best facility available to enjoy their senses. And all that facility in return purifies their senses by which they enjoy more. The best facility to hear the best of the music, the kirtans, the best darshans, the deities of the Lord, the best quality prasadam, not only nourishes our body, but purifies our body, mind, and soul. And so does everything like that. And that's how the worship of Supreme Personality of Godhead is recommended through the pages of Bhagavad Gita and Srimad-Bhagavatam. Therefore, Sukdev Goswami here in this 10th verse says, Akama sarva kama va moksha kama dhariti tivrena bhakti yogena yajate purusham param. Whoever, whatever you are, in all and every situation, worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He would definitely fulfill your material desire also. So in any condition, we should approach it. With that, I thank you all for your kind attention, for listening to me all this while. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki, Srimad-Bhagavatam ki. I hope I did not confuse you further. The topic itself was confused whom to worship. Right. Hare Krishna.
Do we have any?
Very nice class.
Yeah, Atmaram Prabhu, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just saying, thank you, Prabhu. The class was very nice. Thank you so much.
Any corrections? Any comments?
No, Prabhu, it was at perfection level.
Hare Krishna.
Prabhuji, if you have 5 minutes, then we can take some question answers if someone has any.
Yes, yes, definitely.
Anyone have any
If
questions?
there are any questions.
Go ahead, unmute yourself and ask.
Also like to thank Dwakadis Prabhu for hosting it. Thank you, Prabhu.
Any questions, Haribo?
So there are two understandings at the end of the class that there are no questions. One is nobody understood anything. Right? Or they knew everything beforehand. So anyways, the speaker role becomes minimal then.
There's one question.
I'm just joking. I'm just joking.
Monica Patel Mataji is asking, where did Krishna come from?
Where did Krishna come from? His address is mentioned in Bhagavatam. He is said to be living in Vrindavan, and that's where he resides eternally. So now you're trying to ask more than what is the source of Krishna, if that's what your precisely question is. Yes or no? You may answer, then accordingly I'll go into the details.
Yes, that's what I'm asking.
Okay. So who is the cause of the cause, the supreme cause? You know? Two examples to help you understand this. Then I'll give you some philosophical understanding. Can you close it? The definition of the word Bhagavan, let's begin with the philosophical understanding. The definition of the word Bhagavan itself means the supreme cause, the cause of all causes. The supreme controller, the supreme enjoyer, the supreme owner or proprietor. When the word Bhagavan is used, it means he is the one who is the cause of all and there's no cause of him. So first of all, we have to set the definition. And how do we understand it? Just like an example of a bogie is given. Imagine a child is sitting in the fourth bogie in a train. And when somebody asks a child, who's pulling the bogie? With the limited knowledge, the child would say the third bogie is pulling the fourth bogie. Definitely is correct. It's an immediate cause. Somebody who's little grown up would say, no, there are more bogies ahead of it. The first bogie is pulling the second is pulling the third is pulling the fourth. So the first bogie is pulling the fourth bogie, which becomes the remote cause. But who is pulling the first bogie is the engine, which is the ultimate cause. Yes or no? And that first bogie, the engine is pulling, and the cause of engine's pulling is no one. Mother Monica, making sense? So similarly, for the word Bhagavan, when it is being taken in the scriptures, which means he is the cause of all causes. Mataha parataram nanyat kinchid asti dhananjaya. I am the cause of all causes. Bhagavad Gita 7th chapter, verse number 7. Second example to help you understand is, let's imagine you're watching a movie in a theater. In that movie, everything changes. There are role plays, there are actresses and whatnot. Movie begins in a certain situation, ends with a certain situation. But one of the crew of the movie does not get affected by anything of that movie is the director, isn't it? He's outside of the movie. He directed the movie. He's not in the movie. He directed the movie and he does not get affected through what's going through. So similarly, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, just like Mother Kunti prays, Namaste Purusham Tvadyam Ishwaram Prakati Param Alakshyam Sarvabhutanam Tavayat Avastitam. The very first prayer that Mother Kunti said, Namaste Purusham Tvadyam. Ishwaram Prakriti Param. You're beyond the modes of material nature. You don't get affected by it. You're beyond, which means you're the director of this whole creation. And same Supreme Personality Godhead in the 14th chapter says, Aham Bija Prathapita. I am the seed-giving father of all living entities. So Krishna, Mata Paratam Nanyat, is a cause of all causes, as according to the definition of the word Bhagavan. Therefore, Krishna is addressed as Bhagavan. Hare Krishna. Does that answers it a little bit?
Thank you for these quotes from the Gita and everything. I was just watching a show actually, and it was like talking about, how somebody was an atheist, and then that was the question that he proposed, like, where did God come from if there is a God?
Correct. Agreed on that. There's one thing, I'll just make one small point on it, we'll maybe move on. We need to relearn the vocabulary. We have a very limited understanding of the words that we often use. What I mean, I don't have the time to explain about the subject of vocabulary right now. But every word has a very specific meaning and has to be understood in that context. So let me give some short example on this. Anyways, nothing is coming as an example, which will be short. Fine. So anyways, I would say on this subject matter it would be more appropriate to read and hear subjects like Bhagavad Gita that will help you develop more stronger faith. To conclude with, even somebody says, who created the God? The question to them asked is, who created you? First of all, you tell, that person should be able to answer, who created him? Does he has any understanding about his existence? And to that person, you can ask, how did you choose yourself? Who selected this body for you? Who selected your parents? Who selected your intelligence? Everyone thinks I am the controller, but what level of control do we have? According to medical science, 95% activities of the body are voluntary. Yet we say ourselves controller. To be a controller of anything, we need to have majority share. We have only 5% share on our nervous system. 5% activities we do voluntary, 95% activities are done, involuntary. Involuntary means where I exercise my control is 5%. And autonomous of 95%. Blinking of eyes, breathing, the heart beating and everything. We don't even have a control on our body. And we don't understand how does even body function. So that's the point. There's a lot to understand on this subject matter. Then we just get caught up with the word jugglery, who created God? Because it sounds a very challenging question. Yes, who created God? Okay, fine. Who created you? First of all, answer that. So you'll say my parents. Who created them? He'll say monkeys. If you're in West, you largely believe the monkeys are the source of humans. So anyways, the story goes on. All right. Amrit Hari Prabhu, you have something to say?
Thank you, Sandra Pranam Prabhuji. Actually, two questions, Prabhuji. So first is, as a devotee, we understand that Lord Shiva is the topmost Vaishnava. We approach him like that. But when it comes to general emotion, I think there is a lot of attraction that people have towards Lord Shiva.
Yes.
And we also understand from Srimad-Bhagavatam that he's not a Jiva Tattva. He still has this Satchitananda body, it's basically not a Jiva Tattva. So how we can kind of explain the position of Lord Shiva. At the same time, one question always comes in my mind is, if he's the topmost Vaishnava, why he just grants boons, like for example, we see in the Vaishnava culture, we try to take people to the right path and give them knowledge and like that. So how, being a topmost Vaishnava, he's able to grant boon and also allow the devotees for intoxication and other activities. That was the first thing. And this second question was actually asked to me.
Let's go first by first, one by
Okay.
one. Being a
Yeah.
Kali Yuga memory, I don't want to forget the first part.
We
You had a little.
we might not have enough time. We have another program starting at 8:15. So we just have maybe a couple of minutes.
Yeah, so I guess we should pause then. All right.
So you
So
can get for a few more minutes.
You can answer the first
2 minutes.
question.
okay, so somebody has to tell me how many minutes. I'll try to make half of it to address it.
2 minutes.
So the first part of the thing, how do we understand the activities of Lord Shiva? It's very difficult to understand the activities of pure devotees of the Lord according to the scriptural injunction itself. Unless we are at that level of consciousness, we cannot understand it. To be able to understand how even the devotees to whom we associate, let's say our spiritual masters, or even Prabhupada in certain situations, how he acted, why he acted, is not always possible for us to understand that. We can understand certain responses of Srila Prabhupada when we hear from other senior devotees who understand in right perspective. So first thing is that about understanding Lord Shiva. Regarding how do we explain Lord Shiva's position to others, from the 9th canto Srimad-Bhagavatam, it is mentioned Lord Shiva is an expansion of the Lord. And the Lord expanded as Lord Shiva for performing the function of destruction of this creation. Just like the Lord expands into the Purusha Avatara as Karna Daksha Mahavishnu and Garbhodaksha and Shirodaksha Vishnu. Similarly, the Lord expanded himself as Shiva, as Shambhu, to perform the destruction. And then Brahma Samhita, that verse says that they're one, but it is a milk transformed into yogurt, like that. So when it comes to explaining Lord Shiva, it depends on whom you're talking to, Otherwise, it becomes a complicated subject matter if there are a lot of emotions involved into it. Largely in India, it becomes a trouble. People feel easily offended when the subject matter touch upon it. So it has to be taken properly with a proper sensitivity. But these are the facts. But one thing we have to be careful, don't call him demigod. Then definitely his devotees become upset. They think demigod is lowering the position of a person. So Vaishnavanam Yatha Shambhu is what we call him. And there are many, many pastimes and story. I don't have time because time is running short. You can read about Radha Vallabh deities in Vrindavan. Radha Vallabh deity is a very famous, one of the famous temples of Vrindavan. That deity was a worshipful deity of Lord Shiva. And the devotee of Lord Shiva, this is 2-3 generations before, so who had prayed, he was a great devotee of Lord Shiva. Lord Shiva appeared to him and Lord Shiva said, what can I give it to you? In short, he said, whatever is the dearmost to you, please give me. And Lord Shiva gave the Radha Vallabh deities. And that Radha Vallabh deities, 2 generations later on, when the daughter got married, went as a, you can say as a gift from the father to the, Harivansh, who has this Radha Vallabh temple, who started. And like that, Radha Vallabh deity came. There are many examples of it, which proves how Lord Shiva is the best of the devotees. All right, Amrit Hari Prabhu. So thank you all for kind attention. Hare Krishna. We'll pause here as there's another set of program for all of you and for I have other things too. All right, Prabhuji.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you so much.
Hare Krishna.
Before we let you go, we would like to thank you once again on behalf of ISKCON Calgary. Every devotee of ISKCON Calgary, you can unmute and we'll chant for Prabhuji. Hare Krishna, Hare
Hare Krishna,
Hare Hare,
Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Hare Hare.
so much.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna.